executives from Denel are briefing the media. Gloria Serobe is speaking. Let's listen in.
I have to welcome you, including our union and leadership. Why do we have this meeting today? You haven't seen us having media briefings as the Denel board because we had to come to you when we have something to say. Up to now, we didn't have much to say. As you are all aware, Denel went through a massive liquidity crisis in the last 2 to 3 years. This board, being new at the time, together with the management of Denel Group, had to dig deep looking for solutions to this challenge. The board was particularly aware that, like all operations of this nature, whether you private or you public, you are SOE or you are a listed company, you have to seek solutions internally first as a first prize. And the call for shareholder support is truly, truly the last resort. This is all entities, whether you are public or you are private. And so the board acted this role in terms of finding internal solutions to the problem and not always referring to recapitalization or shareholder support. And so otherwise they shouldn't have a board. It means just government must come and sit here and do what it has to do. It therefore gives me great pleasure to confirm that at long last, all outstanding salaries owed to employees have now been fully paid. Emphasis is fully paid. Payment plans are in place for pay as you earn in terms of SARS, as well as the pension fund. The welfare of our employees and the high value we place on sound labor practices remain a firm commitment of this board. We have not been proud of this chaos, of not being able to meet this kind of obligation. So the question is always going to be, how then did we get here to this point where we can claim with authority that we have done this? And part of today is to explain how we did that. An opportunity in the form of the Denel Medical Benefit Trust was seen as a possibility almost 2 years ago by this board. What we call GMBT was established in 2002 as a vehicle through which Denel has been meeting its contractual medical obligations towards employees who joined the company before 2002. Through the years, the assets of GMBT always exceeded the actual valued liabilities by huge amounts. As a defined benefit plan, which it is, it made no sense why this trust was designed such that Denel, the sponsor company, which is a part of a defined benefit plan, had no access to this large surplus, which as at April 2022, it was as high as 1.472 billion rands, or a 465% funding level. There's no doubt there was abnormality in these numbers. But the way the trust was defined was that Denel, the sponsor company, did not have access to this kind of surplus. And so the exercise to start unlocking this surplus took as long as 2 years because of the nature of the trust, which also required court processes. With the great support of the members of the Pensioners Forum and that of the shareholders in DPE and the members of that particular trust, we were able to get to this point today. Most important, it had to be a win-win for all involved. That is the pensioners, the members, and Denel. And to make sure we had a proper, fair, and equitable process, each of these parties had an actuary to interpret and protect them. NMG was the actuary for the fund. Willis Towers was the actuary for the members and the pensioners, and Deloitte was the actuary for Denel. And for those who have dealt with the benefit fund, it's quite complicated. There's a lot of reliance on the actuaries because the liabilities have to be properly actuarially valued. That's why everybody had to be protected by the actuaries. This was Denel's view of how this process will be properly done and everybody is safely protected because there are human beings in it. And so fast forward to 28 July, 992 million rands became that surplus which could be transferred and attributed to Denel after this elaborate exercise. We are particularly grateful to the leaders of the members forum because it had to be that the members must be supportive of this process. We are grateful to the actuaries who carried us through this. We're grateful to the lawyers who had to balance all the parties, and the commitment of the Department of Public Enterprise to our process, however long it took. It's very important that I emphasize this, that this particular process was communicated to most, if not all, the stakeholders to say, we are doing this to unlock a certain amount of cash flow to deal with our liquidity crisis. This includes labor. I know behind me there's a Solidarity Fund. They had the full timetable in terms of what we think would be the scheduled time in which this surplus would flow into Denel. This was to make sure that nobody thinks that we're folding our arms and doing nothing about the problem that we had. Behind this, knowing, of course, the 992 million rands is not going to answer all of Denel's problems. The company itself needs to be restructured. And so the new restructuring plan, supported by us as the board and the shareholder, will create a self-sustaining business with a significant order pipeline. Part of that plan is a sale of non-core assets. And even that is communicated very well with key stakeholders. This will address the legacy debt which comes from many years ago, and the introduction of liquidity into the company. This will immediately improve profitability, enable the company to retain and appoint able skills and leadership, some of which were lost in the process. I just want to thank again the Pensioners Forum, which was key for us to get to this point, and without which we would not have been able to get traction from our ideas. I have to thank the GMBT trustees. I have to thank the employees who contributed to the process to make sure the payment of the outstanding salaries is being made. I do want to thank employees for their support and commitment during the challenging period we faced. Once again, I think as the chairman of the board, I need to apologize profusely for the stress and the anxieties caused to the employees and their families. We do trust that this will contribute towards the fostering of a productive and normal relationship between Denel and its employees, given that our program and plan going forward, our biggest infrastructure as a company is the people themselves. I would finally just again want to thank our shareholder, DG. I want to thank you. The Department of Public Enterprises for their support and commitment throughout this journey, and a special word of thanks to our Minister, Mr. Pravin Gordhan. I think, let me end it there, and if you do not mind, I then can ask, we have here our Chief Restructuring Officer. We also have our interim CEO, if they want to make any comments. And DG, you are free to do so as the department, if anything you want to add to this, after which then I have to field the questions. I just want to emphasize, today I am going to deal with the questions as the chairman of Denel. And where I am trapped, I'm going to ask for help, but direct all the questions to me. Because today, I just want to say, as this board, we're quite comfortable with, we're not here to make excuses, we're not here to defend anything, we're just here to say this board has quietly looked at what can possibly be done to deal with the havoc that Denel found itself in. We are the highest, or we are the last line of defense before we run to Pretoria, our shareholder, for help. Otherwise, they should not have a board. They should be sitting here. Hence, I'm going to take just about every question that comes from everywhere. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pam. Let me hand over to you. You will know best what to do with the flow. But thank you very much for indulging us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I'm not sure if you want to comment now, or should we leave the comments for later, the questions for the panel later? Because we just have one presentation by our CRO in terms of our new strategic approach. It's not a long one, and he can just unpack for you guys, and then we can go into questions. Mr. Riaz Salucci, by the way, sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chairperson of the Denel Board, Acting DG, esteemed members of the media, of course, our union colleagues here, and then the Denel Interim Acting CEO and the management. What I'm going to present to you here is a process that was started about 6 to 7 weeks ago, which essentially encapsulates the process and the interventions that we have undertaken in conjunction with what has already been said by the chairperson, to start the road to recovery, to rejuvenate the organization and to stabilize it, and hopefully to create the conditions which will allow us to get to a position where Denel is again a sustainable organization and a center of defense industrial capabilities and excellence. And that is what I'm going to present to you today as to what we have been busy with in order to get this organization back to where we think it should be in terms of it being a strategic asset of the nation and the country itself. Read from the field you want to change. So, is it working? So this turnaround plan has been socialized and it has been shared with the very key strategic stakeholders of Denel, obviously with the board of Denel, with the management of Denel, with the shareholder, with Armscor, which is a critical partner in our process to rejuvenation, and of course our primary customer and the reason for our existence, the South African National Defence Force and the Department of Defence. And to a large extent, and a great extent I would say, that there has been a lot of alignment and support for this turnaround plan, and we are now in the process of institutionalizing it, embedding it and operationalizing it in terms of developing an implementation plan in conjunction with what we have now heard of by the board chairperson, that we've at least created the possibility now, with having addressed some of the legacy issues, of embarking on this new process. So I'm going to give you a very quick background and what the strategic relevance, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the strategic relevance of Denel, but more specifically it is also about what the plan actually is and what the future end state of Denel should be looking like after we've gone through this process. So of course, I mean, I think you're all familiar with the fact that, Denel is a key strategic industrial capability, which primary purpose is actually to serve the local defense force in order for the defense force to execute its constitutional mandate to safeguard the citizens of our country and to protect its territorial integrity. I think one of the critical issues really is that we all talk about what is the relevance of Denel. And the fact of the matter is that it is the custodian, has been and will continue to be the custodian of strategic and sovereign capabilities of the National Defence Force. Not only is it the custodian, it has been the original equipment manufacturer and maintenance repair organization for numerous critical systems. And when we talk of critical systems, those systems which allow the Defence Force its combat capability. But as we're also all aware of, the fact of the matter is that over the last while, the South African defense budget has been declining quite significantly. And I think, the normal norm in the world, even according to the United Nations, is around about 2% of GDP is what is normally acceptable in terms of defense spend. I think right now we're on somewhere about 0.7% in terms of defense spend as a percentage of GDP. This has had a direct effect on the Defence Force and its ability to rejuvenate itself with capital equipment and support on the support side, as well as having an adverse effect on Denel because we have not been able to fund the necessary capabilities via the defense budget, which we historically used to do. Okay. So between about 2010, 2015, I mean, Denel was in a healthy situation. We were getting out of a very difficult financial and economic and commercial position. We were profitable. But after around 2016 onwards, it showed signs of real distress. And we had to take on additional debt, which had a huge burden, financial burden on liquidity, and our working capital could not be used to fund the growth that we had envisaged at that point. Suffice to say that Denel was in a very difficult situation, and that just continued until where we are at the moment. So you just bear with me here. Of course, because of state capture and together with weaknesses in management, leadership, I mean, we all know what the effects of all of this. It had a fundamental impact on the liquidity crisis, and it had impacted on our ability to develop any kind of effective turnaround strategy. Okay. And then, of course, when COVID came, it was the absolute perfect storm, you know. And all of these combined totally to create a situation where revenue fell from a peak of about 8.2 billion rand in 2015-16 to where we are now, just around under 2 billion rand. I mean, and you can see the devastating effect that it had, that the revenue was going down significantly, but our footprint and the cost base of Denel remained the same. And we all know what was the effect of that in terms of our ability to meet our obligations, specifically also with regard to our people and their salaries. So it was imperative. I mean, we've reached the point where it is really critical that there was an intervention that government, this shareholder and the board took, that we had to stop this bleeding right now. We had to do something in order to make sure that we retain these strategic and sovereign capabilities. Okay. Now, in terms of the institutional mandate of Denel, it says very clearly it's a custodian of assigned strategic and sovereign capabilities. I mean, we all know that. You can find it in the Defense Review, you can define it in the white paper. But very practically, if you look at the role of the Defense Force, both internally and externally, internally we have our responsibility as the National Defense Force to support the civilian authorities during specific contingencies. If you saw what happened with the unrest last year, and you saw with the natural disasters that took place this year, the Defense Force played a significant role in assisting the law enforcement agencies, natural disaster management systems, local government, provincial government, and national government to help to address those issues that we were confronting the country. And in both instances, if you look at what happened throughout the country last year and then in KwaZulu-Natal with the floods, the Air Force and the Defense Force, and particularly the Air Force, played a significant role. Their helicopters that played that role in assisting the police and assisting government to deal with that crisis were the helicopters that were built and maintained and supported by Denel. Now you can imagine if the Defense Force is so reliant, specifically in this instance the Air Force, on those platforms, air platforms, if Denel is not in a position to support those particular platforms, those systems and capabilities, it has a complete negative effect on the operational availability of the Defense Force to assist the civilian authorities. Externally, in terms of our foreign policy, we've got two deployments at the moment. The one is in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and the other now is more recently in terms of our deployment to Mozambique in support of the government there in SADC. Again, in both those instances, and specifically in the DRC, the two combat platforms that played a significant role in assisting the United Nations to address the issues around the rebel groupings there were the Royal helicopter and the Oryx helicopter and the C-130. If Denel was not in a position, and is not in a position because of its inability to support that equipment and weapon systems, you can imagine the operational and combat effectiveness of the Defence Force declined significantly. So it is critical that we maintain these capabilities for the Defence Force. Similarly in Mozambique. So not outside of its institutional mandate, just from a very practical level, we've got to make sure that we have those capabilities funded in support of the Defence Force. So if we agree that we need to keep this organization because it is the custodian of strategic and sovereign capabilities, what do we need to do? Now, there are two typical and very critical issues that we need to understand, okay? It does support the foreign policy, but more particularly, it provides the country with national strategic independence, okay? And this is very critical. Because if South Africa is one of the few countries in the world outside of the developed nations, okay, where we have a developed defense industrial capability. If we lose this industrial capabilities, which has been led by Denel for so long, okay, we will lose the strategic independence that it provides to government. You can imagine if we're relying on third parties for our defense equipment and capabilities. If that country or countries that are supplying South Africa decide for whatever reason, geopolitically and otherwise, to cut the supply of defense capabilities to South Africa, it leaves us without the ability to determine our own future from a defense and security perspective. And of course, Denel is a prime contractor at level 4, level 5 systems integrated. There are not many companies in the world and locally that plays that role of integration. So you can understand the human capital that exists in this organization. And it contributes significantly to the export industry from almost 7 billion rand per annum, okay? So it is a vital element in the manufacturing and industrial and technological sector of our country, okay? Now we say, what is the business case? What underpins this turnaround strategy, okay? Right now, we've got a self-sustaining order book of about 12 billion rand, okay? Which is 6 times what the annual revenues at the moment, okay? The problem that we have at the moment is that we don't have the wherewithal, the liquidity, and the cash reserves. And there's been a huge brain drain in terms of skills leaving the organization to be able to execute that order book that is there, okay? There is also a potential, after an analysis, not only by ourselves, but by Armsco, we have identified a potential order book of about 30 billion rand that Denel can win and can execute over the next 3 to 5 years. And this is not a thumbsuck, okay? These figures actually come from actual requirements that have been discussed with Denel. We know that they are in individual countries' capability requirements, and they are funded. The problem is that we've not been able to close any of these deals because of credibility issues, reputational issues, inability to put up performance guarantees, bank guarantees, okay? And that is where we are moving towards. So there is a clear business case that underpins this turnaround strategy, okay? We still have.
All right, Denel outlining their turnaround strategy, saying there's over 30 billion rand in potential orders. Earlier on, we heard from the chairperson, Gloria Serobe, speaking about how all outstanding Denel salaries have been fully paid. Payment plans are in place for pay as you earn, speaking about how they had to unlock surplus funds from a trust using actuaries to protect the different parties, thanking all the stakeholders for making sure that Denel got paid, and also saying there's a long road ahead in terms of credibility, in terms of restoring trust between the employees and more.